Number 25, the reasoning is vulnerable to criticism on what grounds? What's the flaw? What's the hole in the argument? Let's see if we can find it. Consent forms filled out by subjects before they participate in tests of experimental medicines show that they accept the risk of receiving ineffective substances. Therefore, this casts doubt on the claim made by some medical ethicists that many test subjects resent being given placebos, which happens roughly half the time, or resent being given medicines that turn out to be ineffective, as also happens frequently. So that's the conclusion, is that second sentence, right? And the support is the first sentence. So first of all, what's the conclusion saying? It's saying it's casting doubt on this claim. So in other words, this claim is wrong, right? In other words, let's just simplify the conclusion. The conclusion is just saying that people don't resent being given placebos or ineffective medications in these studies, right? Why? How do we know that? Well, because they fill out these consent forms prior to the study that says that they accept the risk of receiving ineffective substances, aka placebos or medicines that turn out to be ineffective. So the support is saying they fill out these consent forms saying they accept the risk, and the conclusion is saying, therefore, they don't resent it when it turns out that they were given a placebo or an ineffective medication. Now, why is this not necessarily a good argument? Well, just because support doesn't mean conclusion. Just because they fill out a consent form before the study doesn't mean that they don't resent when it ends up being a placebo or the medicine turns out to be ineffective. And specifically, I think the thing that is most important to emphasize here is the change in time, the change in tense, so to speak, verb tense, right? The support is in the past, is they did it before they participated, and then the conclusion is saying they're not going to resent the medicines that turn out to be ineffective, right? That seems to be the biggest jump here. The support is saying, just because the support is true, just because they fill out a consent form prior to they participate in the study, doesn't mean they don't end up resenting when those medicines don't work, right? They fill out a form that says, I accept that the medicine I'm given might not work, but that doesn't mean that they later don't perhaps change their mind or change their opinion or their feelings on it and resent it. That seems to be the biggest jump here, right? But any answer that highlights that jump between the support and the conclusion, that essentially just because they fill out this consent form saying they accept the risk before they take the study doesn't mean they don't end up resenting the fact that they were given an ineffective medication. In other words, very simply, just because support doesn't mean conclusion. That's what we always want to look for and think about on flaw questions. Let's find an answer that essentially says that. A says the argument's flawed because it infers that two phenomena are associated with each other merely from the claim that there are many instances in which they are both present. Now, what is the conclusion of the argument trying to prove that two phenomena are associated with each other? And was the support of the argument that there are many instances in which both phenomena are present? I don't think so. I don't think either of those things are true, right? First of all, what two phenomena are we even talking about here? The support was that almost all people accept the risk of receiving ineffective medications, and the conclusion was saying, therefore, they don't resent receiving ineffective medications. I don't see what two phenomena were saying that there are many instances that they are both present in the support, and the conclusion is saying, therefore, they must be associated with each other, right? I don't see any of what A is saying in this paragraph. It seems to be pretty foreign to the structure of this argument, therefore it's definitely wrong. B says that the argument is flawed because it uses as evidence the opinions of people who are unlikely to be qualified to make informed judgments about the value of placebos. What on earth does that even mean? Are we relying on opinions of people in this paragraph? It doesn't seem like it. The support doesn't say, some people say, blah, 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 blah. The support of the argument just says, consent forms filled out by subjects indicate that they accept the risk, right? So it's not like we're relying on someone's opinion to say that they accept the risk and that that person's opinion is unqualified to make informed judgments about the scientific value of placebos. And by the way, scientific value of placebos, how is that an element that's relevant to this argument? It's all about a person's mind and whether they accept or resent being given the placebo. It's not about the scientific value of the placebo. So there's a lot of stuff in B that doesn't really add up. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't line up with this paragraph, right? We're not using as evidence opinions of anyone. We're stating as fact that these consent forms are filled out by almost everyone before these studies, and we're saying that therefore they don't resent being given the placebos or the ineffective medications. We're not using any opinions of people who are unqualified. I don't see anywhere in this paragraph where an unqualified person gives an opinion and that opinion is used to prove the conclusion, and therefore B is not right. C tells us that the argument's flawed because it uses evidence that's drawn from a sample that is probably unrepresentative. This is always a tempting answer, but we have to ask ourselves, was the support about an unrepresentative sample and then the conclusion extrapolated too far, too broadly from that unrepresentative sample? Well, let's see. Who was sampled in the support? The supporting evidence, which is the first half of the paragraph. Who was sampled? Who are the people that we looked at that filled out these consent forms, right? Did we say that all, college age females filled out this consent form and that said that they accepted the risk and therefore all humans accept the risk, right? Did it do something like that? Did it isolate one demographic and then extrapolate based off of that? Well, the answer is no. The support says almost all subjects, right? It says almost all subjects accept the risk of receiving ineffective substances. That's almost everybody. That's representative of the whole. It doesn't say almost all middle-aged males. It doesn't say anything about any specific demographic or unrepresentative sample. It's not unrepresentative qualitatively or quantitatively. It's not a small number. It's almost all of them. That's about as representative as it gets, and therefore C has no place in representing this argument. It's definitely not what we're looking for. D, does this argument take for granted that most test subjects don't change their minds? They don't change their attitudes toward the chance of taking ineffective substances once those substances turn out to be ineffective? I think the answer is yes, right? It does take that for granted because the support is this consent form that they filled out prior to the study, and the conclusion is therefore making an inference about how they feel after the study, that they don't resent it. Why don't they resent it when the medicines turn out to be ineffective, in the words of the paragraph? Why don't they resent that? How do I know that? Because they filled out a consent form prior to the study. Well, guess what? That's taking for granted that they don't change their mind. They don't change their attitude once it happens to them, right? A lot of people, it's all good and well to fill out a consent form and say you're okay with something, but then when that thing happens to you, maybe then you change your attitude, right? That's what D's pointing out, and it's taking for granted that that doesn't happen. That's exactly the jump in this paragraph from the support to the conclusion. It's what we were looking for. It's the right answer. E, is this argument flawed because it draws a conclusion that is essentially about a moral issue by appealing to evidence that is only factual? Now, I don't know exactly what this means. I've seen this answer on a bunch of questions on the LSAT, and I can't think of a time that it was the right answer because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. First of all, why couldn't you do this? Why couldn't you draw a conclusion about a moral issue by appealing to facts, right? Having evidence that is based on facts, aka purely factual, that's the best kind of evidence there is. Why would you want your evidence to not be based in fact, right? What would you rather it be based on fiction, right? So evidence that is purely factual, why wouldn't that be grounds to draw a conclusion about a moral issue or about whatever kind of issue? Who cares if it's from factual evidence? That's the best kind of evidence there is. So first of all, I don't understand how E could possibly be the flaw of an argument. Second of all, it's not really what's going on here. The conclusion is a factual conclusion, right? It's not a moral conclusion. A moral conclusion would be something like saying we should or shouldn't act a certain way. It is morally right or morally wrong to act a certain way. This conclusion isn't saying that. This conclusion is arguing a fact, a statistical fact, and that fact is that people don't resent a certain thing happening to them, right? That is the conclusion. We're arguing a fact. We're trying to argue that something is true or false, right? We're trying to argue that it's true that people don't resent being given these medications. That's not a moral judgment. That's just an argument about what is or is not the case. And therefore, for those reasons, E doesn't really seem to apply to this argument. It's really trying to squeeze a square peg into a round hole. It doesn't fit what we're looking for, and therefore it's not the right answer. If you found this video useful, don't forget to hit subscribe. And for thousands more clear LSAT explanation videos, go to masterlsat.com.